Hello class, welcome to today's lesson. We are now on stage 4 and this is the second lesson. If you remember, yesterday I told you to do the lesson 1 on your own, which was basically about finding out what a quadratic equation was and also some of their classifications. Okay, so lesson number 2 is about the solution of quadratic equations by the method of factoring. But before we go over this, I'd like to point out the following. Yesterday, you took a look at the quadratic equation, which is, like you have read, it's an equation of this type, where a, b, and c are coefficients. Okay, when you have an equation that looks like this, we call this equation a quadratic equation. Another name that we can also say is an equation of second degree. Degree. This is the word degree. In the book, you read grade, right? You remember? But that's incorrect. It's not grade. It's degree, an equation of second degree. So you can call this type of equation either a quadratic equation or an equation of second degree. Those are perfectly interchangeable names for this equation. And then you took a look at some of their classifications. If you find an equation of second degree with all these terms, let's say appearing, for example, let me give you an example. What about this? 2x squared minus 3x plus 4 equals 0. This is called a complete quadratic equation because you have all the three terms: the quadratic term, the linear term, and the constant term. So this is called a complete quadratic equation. And then something that looks like this: 3x squared plus, let's say, 7x, where the equals 0, where the constant term is not appearing. This is called an incomplete mixed quadratic equation. And the other possibility is having something like this: 2x squared minus 1 equals 0. And in this equation, the term that is not available is this one, the linear term. And this is called an incomplete pure quadratic equation. Okay, so those are the classifications for the quadratic equations. This term always has to be present. Okay, so this term cannot be disappeared. Okay, this term, because if you disappear this term from this equation, then the equation no longer is a quadratic equation. Okay, so you can only disappear this one, which is this case, or this one, which is this case. Okay, and sometimes, let me make another remark. Sometimes you're not gonna see the equations looking perfectly like this. For example, take a look at this equation. This equation can be written in this way and it's gonna be exactly the same. Can you see? Look at this equation, look at this other equation, and try to understand why they are in fact the same. They are this same equation. They look different, but they are the same. Because if I make a little change in here, if I add 7x in both sides, I'm gonna get this. If I add 7x, you see, this is an equal sign, and this is the same as this. So sometimes you're not gonna look at them in this way. You have to rearrange the equations so that now they look perfectly in this way with a 0 on the right side, etc. Okay, I just wanted to make those remarks before we start today's lesson. Let me erase everything. Okay, guys, so today we're gonna solve quadratic equations by the method of factorization. Solution to quadratic equations by factorization. And this is very simple. All we have to understand is the following mathematical fact. This is the fact. If we know that the multiplication of two numbers, a times b, if a times b is 0, that is, we don't know a and we don't know b, but we know that their product is 0. That's the only thing we know. That's the fact that we know. Then we can deduce the following conclusion. Either a has to be equal to 0 or b has to be equal to 0. Okay, in order for a product of two numbers to be equal to 0, at least one of them, either a or b, have to be equal to 0. At least one of them. Maybe both. Maybe both. That would be perfectly okay. But at least one of them has to be equal to 0. So this is the fact. This is the fact that we're gonna use in order to apply the method of solution to quadratic equations by factorization. We're going to use this fact, and I'm going to leave it right here. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to give you 5 examples of how this is going to be done. In the first one, we're going to have this equation, x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. This is a complete quadratic equation because it has all its 3 terms. And the way to solve this equation by means of factorization is the following. If you observe, this is a trinomial, a quadratic trinomial, and we could factorize it. Sometimes we're not going to be able to do it. Remember that those trinomials are called prime. When a quadratic trinomial is prime, you cannot factorize it. But in this case, the ones that I'm going to give you in this lesson are all going to be factorizable. So stop the video for a moment, very quickly, and give me the factorization of this trinomial. Do it on your own. Do it now. Okay, now that you have done that, you're gonna realize that the factorization of this trinomial is in fact x minus 3 times x plus 2. And we continue with the writing of my equation. Okay, so all of this equation is equivalent to this, but in a factorized form. Now, what do we do next? Well, we're going to use this fact now. What do we have in here? What we have in here is this. We have a product of two numbers being equal to 0. What two numbers? This one and this one. You can see all of this as a number, as a whole number. Take all of this as a single number and take all of these parentheses as another number. You may call this A, you may call this B, and what you're looking at is that A times B is equal to 0. So basically we have the following, right? We have the following hypothesis. We have that A times B equals 0 in here. And if we know that, according to this fact, we should conclude that either the first number must be 0 or the second number must be 0. You see, I'm just applying this fact. Try to understand why I'm just applying this fact to this problem. I'm helping myself with this fact in order to solve this problem. That's all I'm doing, guys. Okay, and then once I get down to this level, to this step, the rest is very simple because now what I have here at this level is two equations, this one and this one, and these equations are linear, you see, because the exponent of the x is 1 in both of them, and we know how to solve these equations because that's all we did in the previous stage, solving linear equations. So let's solve this equation. What do we get? We're going to get x equals 3, or if we solve this other equation, we get x equals minus 2. Okay, I'm going to frame this, because these two are my solutions to my original equation. You see, whenever you solve a quadratic equation, guys, you will always find two solutions. always you will find two solutions. In this case, it's 3 and minus 2. Some people write this, like in order to differentiate them, some people say x1 in order to talk about the first solution, x1 equals 3, or x2, which is the second solution, which is minus 2. Okay? And that's okay. That's also perfectly okay. Okay, so that's it, guys. We have solved this equation. You can confirm each of these numbers. Okay, when you put them in the equation, back in the equation will be satisfied. And that's how we solve a quadratic equation by means of factorization. Okay, let's do another one. Number 2. Let's solve now this equation. 6x squared minus x equals 2. This is also a complete quadratic equation. Why? Because even though it doesn't look like in the previous way, which I showed you, like if you remember, okay, this is a complete quadratic equation. It doesn't look like that exactly because we have a 0 on the right side and we have a 2 on this right side. We can rearrange the terms very easily. We can bring this one to the left side by subtracting 2 in both sides. You see? And now this is what we understand as a complete quadratic equation. There you go. Next, what is the next step? You're going to factorize this quadratic trinomial. One more time, pause the video right now and factorize it. Okay, so now that you're back, you should have this factorization. 2x plus 1 times 3x minus 2 equals 0. This is the factorization form of this equation in here. Okay, perfect. Now what do we do next? At this point in my process, I go back to my fact and I say, okay, if the product of two numbers is 0, which is the same that we have in here, we have this number, all of this number, times all of this number equal 0. So we have in fact the same as in here. Then we must conclude that either the first number is 0 or the second number is 0. So we can write this. Either 2x plus 1, which is my first number, must be equal to 0, or the second number, 3x minus 2, must be equal also to 0. And then we end up with two equations, this and this, two equations which are linear and are very easily solvable. So when we solve this equation, we get x equals minus 1/2. Make sure about what I'm saying. And when we solve this equation, x will be equal to 2/3. Make sure about these results. You should not believe me. Pause the video and do them on your own. So this is my two solutions. I can label one as the first solution and the other as my second solution. If you have a doubt about which one is the first solution and which one is the second, it makes no difference. It makes no difference. You can call this one the first solution and this one the second. It's completely irrelevant. Okay, so I'm done. I'm done. My equation, which was this one at the beginning, has these two solutions, which means that when I put any of these two numbers, for example, 2/3, if I write 6 times 2/3 to the square minus 2/3, that's going to be equal to 2. And that's what we mean by a solution, right? So there you go. Next example, number 3. What about this other equation? Look at this equation. This is an incomplete mixed quadratic equation. Why? Because it's lacking the constant term. Okay, so how do we solve this one? Well, pretty much in the same way. And it's actually easier when we have an incomplete mixed quadratic equation, because all you have to do is the following. You can factorize these two terms by taking out as a common factor the x, like in this way. Look, x that multiplies 3x minus 1 equals 0. This factorization is the same as this. X times this gives me this, and x times minus 1 will give me this. You see, so it's actually much simpler. When you have an incomplete mixed equation, all you need to do is take x as the common factor and perform this factorization. For example, let me give you another quick example. 6x squared minus 2x equals 0. Well, let me change this number. 5. Okay, how do you factorize this? In this way, x that multiplies 6x plus 5 equals 0. So you see, it's quite simple. Okay, so we have this, and we have the same concept. We have the multiplication of two numbers. This is the first number, this is the second number, and the product of these two numbers is 0. So I must conclude that either, and it's very important that you write this word, okay, either the first number is 0, or that's also a very important word, or 3x minus 1 is 0. This is the deduction that I can come up with by looking at this. And then, well, we already have found one of the solutions, because there is nothing to solve in here. It's already solved. X equals 0. Or if I solve this equation, I'm going to get x equals 1/3. Make sure about that. And these are my two solutions. This is my solution 1, this is my solution 2, and I'm done. These are my two solutions for this quadratic equation, which happens to be incomplete mixed. Example number 4. X squared minus 2 equals 0. Well, now I'm gonna keep these ones for next class. I'm gonna stop it right there, because I think that was enough. That's all you need. Okay, up until the third example, that's all you need in order to solve the learning activity that I'm gonna give you as homework, which is on page, it's on page 204. I'm gonna write it down here, page 204, and you're gonna do only the second exercise. There are two exercises, 1 and 2. You're only gonna solve the second exercise, which begins by solve the next quadratic equations by factoring, and you have from A up until J. You're gonna do this all. Okay, guys, so that's it. This concludes the lesson. If you have questions, you can ask me as always, and I see you on Monday. Have a good day and a good weekend.